We've presented the macro of Cosmonarchy Brood War, so let's talk micro. Starcraft is renowned for being a mechanically demanding game, so this subject is arguably more important than the economics and tech trees. You know what we're talking about today. Welcome to the Micro Crash Course. For good or for ill, anyone who's played Starcraft for even a short while will be acutely aware of how difficult precise unit control can actually be. In Cosmonarchy Brood War, we seek to reward precise plays, and have taken several steps towards making individual units respond more immediately and accurately to your commands. A common example of Starcraft's wonky controls, cited by critics and fans alike, is the movement of groups of units, with some units being particularly obtuse. In Cosmonarchy Brood War, the Drakodin, formerly Dragoon, is no longer plagued with such issues. This issue also applied to an array of other units, to varying degrees. The Goliath, a Cantor, formerly Reaver, Zethrakor, formerly Zergling, and Ultrakor, formerly Ultralisk, all sport improved group movement in our project. And they aren't the only ones either. In conventional StarCraft, units have a random delay before processing an order, leading to inconsistent results when issuing mission-critical orders. This timer could sometimes be quite sizable, approaching a third of a second in length. This mechanic has been removed in Cosmonarchy Brood War, making your units follow your commands far more consistently, and with a much snappier pace. A fairly common bug within StarCraft involves units simply freezing in between attacks. Along with a smorgasbord of other bugs, this one has been fixed in Cosmonarchy Brood War. And you shouldn't ever lose engagements because your infantry decided to go on a coffee break while the Zerg were tearing down your entire base. And last on the subject of order processing is a quick note that you can hold shift to queue deployments like Siege Mode and Burrow. We haven't completely implemented queue handling for all orders, but it's something that will eventually be done. Workers have received a host of internal changes as well. For one, they no longer provide collision to any units, be they your own, your allies, or your enemies, while harvesting or returning resources. You can still drill onto your opponent, but you won't start decolliding their units until you issue a non-harvest command. You'll also notice that workers no longer accelerate, and instead move at consistent speeds. This was tricky to get right, because it initially made them far more efficient at harvesting resources. But with them having a slower top speed than in conventional StarCraft, we were able to balance the scales. The slower speeds might mean that you'll want to scout a bit earlier on larger maps, so take note of that. Rather than being entirely random, the Mason, formerly SCV, will rotate around its construction site in a preset clockwise route. This, of course, can and should be committed to memory for when you're harassing a Terran player with your Scribe, formerly Probe. Allied units, including your own, of course, no longer block building placements in Cosmonarchy Brood War. Mines are detonated, and deployed Terran units are forced into their mobile forms. Burrowed units, no matter who owns them, are forcibly unburrowed when construction begins. This makes it far easier to place static defense structures in your resource line, among other things. Eventually, we will reserve the resource costs of queued structures, ensuring that your buildings always make. One of the first things we wanted to do when overhauling StarCraft 1 was remove as much in-game randomness as possible, and replace it with compelling game mechanics. To this end, the 1 in 256 chance to miss that applies to every attack in StarCraft 1 has been ripped out of the game and dispensed with in the closest dumpster fire, where it belongs. Along with that, you no longer have miss chance when units are under doodad sprites or up cliffs. When you have an opposing unit at a height disadvantage, your ranged combatants gain +2 weapon range. Eventually, we will investigate granting them additional sight range as well, to really sell the idea that you can see your house from here. Needless to say, cliff advantage conferring weapon range bonuses has proven an integral part of Defender's advantage within Cosmonarchy Brood War, and makes map design far more interesting. Skirmishes that take place around small hills or other height transitions become a lot more exciting when you know that you're not going to simply miss your opponent every other attack, and instead, they'll be able to shellac you from greater distance. There are other random elements that we've removed, like a randomized delay added on to attack cooldowns. And there are still a few niche randomized interactions that need to be sniffed out and removed, but we'll get them all eventually. We have removed unit sizes and weapon damage types in Cosmonarchy Brood War, and replaced these systems with armor penetration. As the name implies, this statistic allows attacks to ignore their target's armor. Armor penetration never grants bonus damage, so if you have more armor pen than your target has armor, you'll simply deal full damage. Units that previously had specialized damage types tend to have low or no armor penetration, and often fire multiple projectiles, further increasing the effectiveness of armor against their attacks. Units previously classed as small tend to have low or no armor, while units previously classed as large tend to have high armor. Combining low armor penetration with armor-rending effects is still exceptionally effective, and has been made possible even if you don't have access to acid spores. And yes, Harakans, formerly Firebats, are meta. Many units in Cosmonarchy Brood War sport passive abilities that benefit from good positioning before, during, and even after fights. Some examples include: the Terran Cyclops leaves behind a latent shell with each attack, which releases targeted shrapnel after 2 seconds, dealing damage to all targets within a short range. This area damage is ally safe, and synergizes beautifully with slow or stun effects. When attacking enemies, the Protoss Ecclesiast restores a small amount of shields to any ally within a short range of the target. This jumpstarts shield regeneration as well, making the Ecclesiast a powerful support unit. The Zerg Core has Crushing Tide, allowing it to fire attacks at up to 3 targets at once. Each one of their attacks bounces once for reduced damage, making them highly adept at controlling crowds. Active abilities can be quite influential as well, and many of them have been converted from simple point-and-clicks into skill shots or area denial channels. Irradiate is now a fire-and-forget missile that leaves behind a radiation field for 10 seconds. Psionic Storm now requires a 1-second channel, and deals slightly more damage overall, but lasts 10 seconds instead of 3. Plague also requires a 1-second channel, and leaves behind a field that infects targets that walk through it. Should the victims of Plague die while still afflicted, they will infect nearby targets, creating room for very interesting strategies. Once you learn the mechanics of Cosmonarchy Brood War, and the synergies between its myriad units, you can assemble impressive unit compositions to specialize against your opponent. Testing your positional play, alongside your broad strategic comprehension, is what the game is all about. We'd be remiss if we didn't touch on quick targeting and quick building. These features are borrowed from MOBA games, which usually refer to them as quick casting. We have a full video on this exciting config option that we'll link in the description, but suffice it to say that precise players can issue commands a hell of a lot faster with this. Once you give this project a try, and really experience just how good it feels to control units, take fights, and exploit the battlefield, you'll never look at Starcraft the same way again. We got far more detailed in this crash course, so at the risk of getting further into the weeds, we'll stop here. There's loads more to learn and experience with Cosmonarchy Brood War, so look out for race-specific videos in this series. And if you're hungry to jump in, our Discord server is always open. Until next time.